Angiosperms are the flowering plants. They started making flowers and fruits. The purpose of the flower is to entice the insects for reproduction so it can attract pollinators. It also provides protection for the sperm and the egg. So I'm going to show you a picture of the flower and how it does that. So origin of flowers and fruits was a reproductive adaptation because now they don't have to rely on the wind. They can use insects, they can team up with the animals, and that can help them reproduce. There's a question before we move on. How is gymnosperm reproduction different from the ferns? So type your answer. A, yeah, that's the answer. Gymnosperms produce seeds, ferns don't. So that's the answer. Okay, so angiosperms. These angiosperms have a protective coat. For the gymnosperms, seeds didn't have outer covering. That's why they were called naked seeds. Angiosperms have seeds with the outer covering, so with the protection. So most plant species have reproductive structures called flowers. So that's another purpose of flowers, to make the gametes. So flowers make the gametes. Gamete production, they attract the pollinators. They capture pollen. So I'm going to show you that process as well. And they give protection to those gametes and the reproductive structures. Not all the flowers look like this. This is pampas grass. This is not native to here. It's from Africa, and I don't recommend you guys planting this because it's gonna push out all the native species. So it's a different kind of flower compared to this. So not all the flowers look like this. So let me show you some examples. If you look at a grass flower or wild oat flower, this is what they look like. That's still okay, yes, but like this. So they don't really look like flowers. Also bamboo flowers. So these still rely on the wind. They have similar, that's bamboo flowers. So they don't look like, this flower here. So flowers, they produce pollen and eggs. Wind or animals, so some of them still rely on the wind. Usually carry pollen from plant to plant. Fruits protect the seeds. Also entice the animals. Animals can eat those seeds and then poop it out somewhere, and that seed can grow maybe far away from the parent plant. There can be variation in flowers. I just showed you a few. They don't always look like this, and that happened through evolution, through millions of years of evolution. So again, this is the generalized cycle that also applies to the angiosperms. So let me show you what I want you guys to know. So first thing I want you to know that sporophyte is the stage that's going to be making the flower. And that's also the dominant stage. So I think I forgot to write for the gymnosperms the dominant stage. The dominant stage for gymnosperms is sporophyte, and the non-dominant is the gametophyte. And then for angiosperms, same thing. And this also makes the flower. Okay, so if it's a perfect flower, in biology we call it a perfect flower if it has both male and female parts. It has this part, anther, it's called anther. Some of you already did the flower anatomy. Some of you are gonna do it today in class. That's gonna make the pollen, male part. And then deep down here is the egg. So that's why I said it gives protection to the egg. Deep down is the egg. That's the female part. So this flower, the pollen is microspores, so same thing as gymnosperms, that's what we call them. The ovule is called megaspores. But this flower it has both male and female parts. There are flowers that have only male parts. There are flowers that have only female parts. So it divides into these megaspores. Usually just one megaspore remains. It usually makes 4. Then the spores divide microscopically into gametophytes. So pollen grains for male, female have the egg. It has the egg. I want you to notice 2 things here. It has the egg. Then it has something called polar nuclei. This is important. So if you're taking notes, write that down. The ovule has the egg and it has the polar nuclei. So let's see what's happening. So I'm gonna go over a process, something that's called double fertilization, and that's what you guys have to know for this group. You have to know double fertilization. So this pollen, a bee grabs the pollen and the pollen lands on this part of the flower. It's called stigma. It's a sticky part. So the pollen lands there. The pollen lands here. So here you have the pollen. This pollen is going to go through this part that's called a style, and it's going to grow a pollen tube. It grows a pollen tube and gets to the egg here. So the process when the bees drop this pollen on here, this pollination, it lands on stigma. The pollen grain germinates, grows a pollen tube, and travels to the egg. Now, again, if you're taking notes, I need you to write this down. There is 2 sperm nuclei that are going down through this pollen tube. Not 1, 2. What's gonna happen, that's the pollen tube. 1 sperm is going to fertilize this zygote. That's gonna turn into an embryo. Other sperm is going to fertilize something called endosperm. That's the polar nuclei. And that becomes the food for the embryo. So zygote develops into embryo and the endosperm provides the food. That's double fertilization process. So it's like, so it turns into fruit. Sometimes fruits don't have lots of fleshy material and they can have just a little bit like pea plants. Other times they have lots of fleshy material to entice the animals. So there's a seed coat. It's not a naked seed. There's a seed coat, that's the fruit, some fruit around it. And then the animals can eat the fruit and the seed can survive the digestive system. So it survives through the digestive system. And then the seed is pooped out by the animal somewhere, maybe far away from the parent plant. So that's called seed dispersal. So the seed dispersed far away from the parent plant. And then because the seed is surrounded by the animal poop, it's a good fertilizer. So it starts to grow. So that's the process that's happening. Something that's very important, that's double fertilization process. So seed germinates into young sporophyte. That's a sporophyte. And then it turns into mature sporophyte, it makes the flowers, the whole cycle kind of repeats. So know that sporophytes making flowers. Flower can have both parts, pollen and the ovule, that's the female, as the male microspores. And then know this process here. And it has an egg and a polar nuclei. That polar nuclei is going to turn into endosperm. That's food for the egg. So let me show you a video for that. So this is what you guys need to memorize, not the whole cycle. So before actually we do that, let's look at the flower anatomy. So flower anatomy, it can have male and female, both parts. This part, stigma, that's the sticky part. That's where the pollen lands. Style, that's what the pollen That's what brings the pollen down to the egg. So it travels through the style. And then this ovary is like uterus in humans. Inside this, you have the ovule, which is the egg that grows into egg or embryo. And male part, that's the female part, is called pistil. Female part is called pistil. Old term was sex pistil, but now it's just called pistil. Male part is called stamen. That's anther that makes the pollen. Filament is the stalk. So anther is the one that's making the pollen. Filament is the stalk. Then you have the sepals, leaves, stems, and it also has the vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. This part, stamen, it's used in cuisines known as saffron. So what people, they have to do, they have to go from flower to flower and pick the saffron. They use it a lot in a Persian food. And because they have to go from flower to flower, it's very expensive. So let's look at the price. 1 pound, it's $1,000. That's very expensive. 5,800 for, I don't know how much. $32 for 0.3 ounces. I don't know if that includes shipping. So it's very expensive. I think you have to only put a little bit in the food. So let's look at double fertilization.
Involves the fusion of in flowering plants. Double fertilization involves the fusion of two sperm cell nuclei of the male gametophyte with two cell nuclei of the female gametophyte. The tube cell of the pollen grain elongates to form a pollen tube. The tube nucleus leads the way through the tissue of the style toward the female gametophyte. The two sperm cells travel through the pollen tube and enter the ovule. One sperm fuses with the haploid egg cell to form the zygote. The other sperm unites with the diploid central cell to form a triploid cell that will develop into endosperm.
Full fertilization. I'm gonna narrate it one more time. So you have the female egg cell and the polar nuclei. This diploid polar nuclei. So two sperm come down from stigma through the style, forming a pollen tube. And then one of these sperms is going to go to the egg and make a zygote. It's going to turn into embryo. And the other one goes to this polar nuclei that's going to turn into endosperm that becomes the food for the embryo. So that's the process of double fertilization that you guys have to know. When I ask on the exam, some of you are still going to say that it's going to fertilize 2 eggs. It does not fertilize 2 eggs. It fertilizes 1 egg and then 1 endosperm. That's food for the embryo. So this is the life cycle. That's the overview. Look how much there is. That's why I'm not going to have you memorize this whole thing. Know the process of double fertilization, and then which stage is dominant and which is non-dominant. And then there's egg and two polar nuclei. And this stage makes the flowers. But I'm not going to ask you for the steps for this cycle. So when we were talking about flowering plants, some of them, we eat them. So zucchini blossoms. So this is before they flower. So you can plant them before they flower. You can pick them, fill them up with cheese or whatever you want, and then you can deep fry them. So that's food, the flowers you're eating. And we've been talking about pollination. So they depend on the bees, the animals, and the wind. So if you have some tomato plants or some vegetables in your backyard and you want to do some pollination, you can pretend to be a bee. And you can take a brush. You can brush it on one flower, so tomato plants, and then brush it on the next flower. So you can do the pollination, hand pollination using a pollination brush. They also use the electric toothbrush now. The electric toothbrush is the vibrations are mimicking the bee, and they pick up pollen either from the tomato plants and then pollinate like that. There's a question for you guys. In the angiosperm life cycle, the seed is analogous to the blank in human life cycle.